The clock on the custom-made marble fireplace mantel in the living room chimed 11 times. The sound, usually soft, seemed to detonate in the absolute silence of the penthouse, measuring out not time, but the slow, agonizing drip of dread. Ethan Thorne, 45, stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the shimmering, indifferent grid of TriBeCa. He was a man accustomed to precision, a celebrated architect whose firm specialized in rendering structure from chaos. His life, like his buildings, was a study in minimalist perfection, clean lines, expensive materials, and an absolute adherence to design. Tonight, however, the foundation of his own life was beginning to buckle. Clara hadn't come home. It wasn't just a late night. It was a no-show after the opening night gala of the Hauser and Wirth retrospective, an event she had spent 6 months curating and leveraging for her own gallery's next funding round. Clara, an art consultant of rising renown, lived for these nights. She always called, always sent a photo, a quick, elegant acknowledgement of their marriage, even when miles apart. The silence since 7 p.m., when her assistant had texted only to confirm she was at the after-party, was deafening. He walked over to the immense, charcoal gray sectional sofa. The remote for the smart home system lay precisely on the center cushion, exactly where he had left it hours ago, a tiny testament to a routine that was now brutally interrupted. Ethan ran a hand over the smooth, cool leather. Everything in this space, the abstract, Rothko-esque painting, the perfectly calibrated lighting, the view that cost more than most small towns, was a collaborative masterpiece of their success. A beautiful lie. He picked up his phone, the heavy titanium case cold against his palm. His finger hovered over her contact name, Clara Thorne. But he didn't call. He knew the answer already. He knew it in the way the air felt too still, in the precise, sick throb behind his eyes that told him this wasn't an accident or a delay, but a choice. He lowered the phone, placing it on the coffee table beside a book on Frank Lloyd Wright, opened precisely to page 112. He was turning to walk into the kitchen when the table vibrated. He didn't rush. Ethan turned slowly, moving with the measured pace of a man walking into an empty tomb. The screen was illuminated by a notification from an unfamiliar number. He unlocked the phone and opened the message thread. It was from Clara's burner phone, the one she used for discreet, high-stakes client negotiations, the one he wasn't supposed to know about. The text was 2 words. No punctuation, no apology, no salutation, just a declaration. I'm staying. For a long minute, Ethan stood perfectly still. The clock ticked. The HVAC system hummed. The distant muffled sound of a late-night siren in the city below faded into nothing. The architect, the master of control, was rendered mute by 2 monosyllabic words. The shock wasn't the confirmation of the affair. He had sensed the scent of another man's expensive cologne on her scarf 2 weeks ago. The shock was the sheer, brutal economy of her communication. It wasn't an emotional cry or a terrified confession. It was a transaction, a receipt for a life exchanged. She hadn't bothered to offer an explanation because she no longer owed him one. He was silent. The silence was absolute, penetrating the space between his ribs and settling into the cold, hard cavity of his heart. In that vacuum, something shifted. The agonizing dread was overwritten by a startling, crystalline clarity. Ethan didn't feel heartbreak. He felt insulted. He felt the professional outrage of a man whose carefully engineered structure had been vandalized by cheap spray paint. The text also included a photo, a tiny thumbnail image tucked beneath the words. He tapped it. It was a close-up of a rumpled satin sheet, and resting on the pillow, Clara's gold Cartier tank watch, the one he had given her for their 10th anniversary. A subtle flex, a message within the message, I am here, and I am not hiding. He zoomed in, his expression neutral. He recognized the watch, but more importantly, he recognized the faint, embroidered crest on the linen, the mark of the luxurious Baccarat Hotel, the preferred rendezvous spot for the city's power brokers, particularly Mark Harrington, the venture capitalist who had just finalized funding for Clara's expansion. Ethan had casually met Mark at a few charity functions, a man of blunt, loud ambition, the antithesis of Ethan's quiet calculation. Ethan slowly exited the photo, deleted the thread entirely from his phone, and then blocked the burner number. The total time elapsed since receiving the message was 4 minutes and 8 seconds. He didn't go to the liquor cabinet. He didn't smash anything. Instead, he walked into his home office, a space built entirely of glass and polished steel, and sat down at his desk. He opened his laptop, the glow illuminating the sharp lines of his face. He didn't open email or his architectural schematics. He opened a highly encrypted private file he hadn't touched in nearly a decade, a detailed, intricate corporate structure he had designed for Clara's initial gallery launch, complete with partnership agreements, funding milestones, and a complex web of silent liability clauses. Clara had betrayed their marriage with 2 words. Ethan decided his response would be equally concise, but far more structural. His revenge began not with a bang, but with a cold, almost surgical calculation. It began in the silence. The morning after the text arrived was a Thursday, and Ethan's routine was impeccable. He rose at 6:00 a.m., performed his 40 minutes of high-intensity interval training, showered, and was seated at the kitchen island by 7:30 a.m., dressed in a custom-tailored Zegna suit. The only difference was the complete lack of Clara's presence. No scent of her favorite diptyque, candle. No clang of her espresso tamper. No distant murmur of her morning call with her gallery manager. He read the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times over a cup of black coffee, not skipping the arts section, where Clara's gala was praised for its audacious curation. He even read a snippet about Mark Harrington, the venture capitalist, whose firm, Harrington Capital, was rumored to be finalizing a major acquisition in the fintech space. Ethan observed the mention with the detached interest of an analyst studying market data, not a cuckolded husband reading about his rival. At 9:00 a.m., he held his first scheduled video conference with his team regarding the competitive bid for the new Hudson Yards Cultural Center. His focus was absolute. He critiqued the structural integrity of the proposed facade, the inefficient flow of pedestrian traffic, and the unrealistic budget projections, his voice calm, authoritative, and entirely devoid of human warmth. His partners praised his sharp insight, failing to notice the faint, almost imperceptible tremor in his left hand. His public facade was impenetrable, but beneath the veneer of professional competence, Ethan was becoming a collector, not of art, but of data. He understood that raw emotion led to messy, traceable actions. Revenge, for an architect, had to be structural, designed to collapse the integrity of the target's entire foundation, not just a single wall. The target was twofold: Clara Thorne and Mark Harrington. He started with Clara. He didn't hack her primary accounts. That was too crude. Instead, he accessed the shared cloud storage where they backed up photos and documents, a vast, disorganized repository of 15 years of digital life. He filtered the data by date, focusing on the last 6 months, searching for anomalies, unusual travel receipts, deleted calls, photos of her wearing outfits he didn't recognize, or metadata showing she had been physically absent from New York during periods she claimed to be traveling for business. The small, insidious betrayals were there, buried under vacation photos and tax forms, confirming the premeditation of her exit. Then came Mark Harrington. This was more intriguing. Mark was loud, brash, and digitally verbose, posting constantly on LinkedIn and occasionally Twitter about his disruptive vision. Ethan knew that men who talked this much about their success often left the most vulnerable backdoors. Ethan's firm had previously engaged a high-end financial investigative agency for corporate due diligence on a rival bidder. He reactivated that relationship, instructing the agency to conduct an enhanced financial health assessment on Harrington Capital, framing it as preliminary research for a potential investment partnership. He was meticulous in his framing. No personal information, only deep dives into their balance sheets, debt-to-equity ratios, and any historical SEC footnotes. He wanted to know where Mark was weak, where the load-bearing walls of his empire were compromised. That evening, a former university friend, Olivia Reed, a high-powered corporate lawyer whose practice often intersected with Ethan's firm, called him. Olivia was sharp, observant, and had a complex history with Clara, a professional rivalry thinly veiled by social civility. "Ethan, darling, I heard about the retrospective," Olivia said, her tone a mix of concern and thinly veiled curiosity. "But I haven't seen Clara's updates on Instagram. Everything all right? I thought she'd be posting champagne toasts." Ethan took a deliberate, measured breath. He crafted his words like an email subject line, concise, impactful, and ambiguous. "Olivia, thank you for checking in. Clara is focusing on the next phase of her work," he said, injecting a subtle, almost stuttering pause before the word focusing. "She's been under an immense amount of pressure with the Mark Harrington deal. You know how intense those VCs can be. She needed space to breathe and think." "I respect that." He didn't lie. He didn't mention the text. He simply used the established narrative, professional pressure, and introduced Mark's name as the central stressor. He had transformed himself from a husband into a dignified, protective witness, allowing Olivia's imagination and the societal narrative of the high-achieving, stressed American wife to fill in the blanks. Ethan knew the currency of the Manhattan elite was reputation, and the most devastating weapon against a woman like Clara wasn't anger, but pity mixed with suspicion. He hung up, knowing that within 48 hours, the story of Clara's breakdown under the pressure of the Harrington deal would be circulating through the West Village dinner parties, slowly isolating her before the actual attack began. He returned to his computer, reviewing the legal file he had pulled the night before. Within the dense, dry language of the gallery's incorporation articles, there was one specific, almost poetic clause he had inserted a decade ago, labeled Silent Partner Redemption Rights. It was a lever he had designed not for profit, but purely for control, buried deep in the corporate architecture. It allowed him, as the primary initial funding source, to demand a sudden, non-negotiable review of specific assets if the gallery incurred undisclosed material changes in fiscal or ethical standing. It was the perfect weapon, a financial chokehold, perfectly legal, and completely deniable as personal vendetta. It looked like a standard corporate compliance review. It was the first structural fault line he planned to exploit. He leaned back, the steel frame of his chair cool against his spine. The city lights below sparkled, silent witnesses to his strategy. Clara had chosen a loud public passion with Mark Harrington. Ethan would choose a quiet, private destruction. 3 days. That was how long it took Ethan to execute the first phase of his strategy. 3 days during which he responded to inquiries about Clara's absence with the same polished script. She's taking a necessary professional retreat before the major capital raise with Harrington, delivered with a sigh that spoke volumes about the burdens of supporting an artistic genius. In those 3 days, the results of the due diligence on Harrington Capital arrived. The report was dense, but Ethan only needed to focus on 2 things: Mark Harrington's aggressive leverage and a series of historical, highly compensated legal settlements regarding non-disclosure violations by his previous firm, buried deep beneath layers of shell companies. Mark wasn't just a venture capitalist. He was a liability artist, a trait that made him fatally vulnerable in the conservative world of high-stakes art funding. The time had come to initiate the silent partner redemption rites. Ethan arranged a discreet meeting with Richard Vance, his longtime legal counsel, and a man who understood the language of silence better than anyone. They met not in Ethan's pristine office, but in a dimly lit old-school club downtown, a space of leather, whiskey, and whispered transactions. "Richard," Ethan began, pushing the gallery's original incorporation documents across the mahogany table. "I need you to activate Clause 4.2. I believe Clara's gallery, Thorne Contemporary, has incurred undisclosed material changes in ethical standing, which, as the initial silent investor, grants me the right to a non-negotiable, immediate financial review." Richard, a man whose expression rarely shifted, raised an eyebrow slightly, a reaction that betrayed his surprise. "Ethan, this clause is typically used when an owner is committing fraud or facing bankruptcy. Clara's gallery is thriving, riding high on the Harrington deal." "The Harrington deal," Ethan repeated, the name a dull, flat stone in his mouth. The potential for ethical compromise stemming from that partnership is, in my professional opinion, a material change. Mark Harrington's past is volatile. I need to protect my initial investment. I require an immediate, full audit of their current assets and liabilities, and the freezing of all non-essential operating capital until the audit is complete. Richard didn't need to ask if this was personal. The very act of pulling such a lever, perfectly legal yet professionally ruinous, was the answer. He saw the cold, calculated revenge etched into the flawless facade of his client. "I can file the initial documentation this afternoon. It will look like a standard compliance review requested by a wary partner. It is airtight, but it will be devastatingly disruptive, Ethan. It will effectively halt all gallery operations outside of paying basic salaries, and it will certainly spook Mark Harrington." "That is the design, Richard," Ethan said, meeting his lawyer's gaze. "I am simply securing my investment. Make sure the notification is delivered via registered courier to Clara at the gallery, not the penthouse. I want the world to see her receive it." The notification landed on Clara's polished walnut desk 2 days later. She was back at the gallery, not triumphant, but harried. The first signs of friction with Mark had appeared. Mark disliked the public attention of the affair and was irritated by the need for secrecy, especially since his fintech acquisition was approaching completion. Clara read the legal document, her blood turning to ice. Audit, freezing of non-essential capital, compliance review. It wasn't a divorce petition, which she had prepared herself for. It was far worse. It was a structural assault on her lifeblood, her gallery. Her first instinct was to call Ethan and scream, to tear down the perfect walls he was hiding behind. But the moment she picked up her phone, she remembered the silence. Ethan hadn't responded to her text. He hadn't fought, hadn't pleaded, hadn't even filed for separation. He had simply disappeared into an unforgiving, bureaucratic void. She called Richard Vance, demanding an explanation. "Clara," Richard said, his tone sympathetic but firm. "Ethan is concerned about the financial stability given the nature of the Harrington partnership. It's entirely within the scope of the 4.2 clause you both signed. He simply wants transparency before you proceed with the major capital injection." Clara felt the cold dread of realization. Ethan hadn't just been her husband. He had been the ghost in her machine, the silent architect of her entire professional life. He had built her platform, and he knew exactly where the weak points were. She quickly contacted Mark, trying to minimize the damage. But Mark, seeing his investment schedule suddenly thrown into jeopardy, reacted with aggressive impatience. "What the hell is this, Clara? Mark snapped over the phone from San Francisco. An audit? Just as I'm about to close the acquisition? If your ex-husband's internal drama messes with my timeline, I'm pulling the whole damn deal. You need to fix this now. Clara realized with sickening clarity that the first strike wasn't just against her finances, it was against her leverage with Mark. Ethan hadn't wanted an emotional scene. He wanted to dismantle her from the inside out, turning her greatest asset, her gallery, into her greatest vulnerability and poisoning her new relationship with doubt and stress. The financial choke had begun, and only Ethan held the release valve. The whispers started gently, like the faint draft through an improperly sealed window, but quickly became the ambient noise of the Manhattan social sphere. The narrative, Clara Thorne, the brilliant but fragile art consultant, buckling under the pressure of securing the massive Mark Harrington funding, was now fully established, thanks to Ethan's carefully planted seeds. Ethan, meanwhile, became a masterclass in performative suffering. He attended charity galas solo, his posture impeccably straight, his eyes holding a calculated weariness. When asked about Clara, he'd offer a soft, almost imperceptible shake of the head and the same somber line. She's pursuing what she believes she needs right now. I'm just focused on keeping things stable until she decides her path. His masterpiece of social engineering occurred at a private dinner hosted by Senator Eleanor Hayes, a formidable patron of the arts and a key board member for the museum Clara desperately needed for her flagship exhibition. Ethan arrived slightly late, dressed in a simple dark gray suit that screamed understated dignity amidst the flashier attendees. He was quiet, drinking only sparkling water, and engaging in deep intellectual conversations about urban density and sustainable design. He was the perfect picture of the stoic, wronged husband, a man who suffered quietly, refusing to drag his personal tragedy into the public eye, thereby inviting the public to do it for him. He waited until the dessert course, timing his move with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. Olivia Reed, the corporate lawyer he had confided in, cornered him by the wine display. "Ethan, I've heard things," Olivia murmured, her eyes wide with manufactured sympathy. "People are saying she's not just taking a break. They're saying Mark Harrington is involved. It's disgusting, after everything you built for her." Ethan lowered his gaze, his voice a gravelly whisper meant only for her. "I suspect that's true, Olivia, but I won't confirm it. I won't ruin her legacy, even if she's destroying mine. I just wish she hadn't entangled her professional life, the gallery, with this distraction. The audit I initiated, it's necessary. I saw Mark's financials. The man is a walking ethical time bomb. I'm protecting the gallery from him, not punishing Clara." He had done it. He had presented the affair not as a personal failure, but as a severe professional liability, elevating his revenge from petty jealousy to righteous corporate stewardship. By refusing to confirm the affair while heavily implying it, he granted his allies the moral high ground and the exciting narrative of a secret to share. Within hours, Senator Hayes received a discreet call from Olivia, who, in turn, received a carefully anonymized, legally compliant snippet of Mark Harrington's historical SEC settlements from one of Ethan's contacts. The senator didn't care about Ethan's feelings. She cared about the museum's reputation and avoiding entanglement with a venture capitalist known for skirting securities laws. Meanwhile, Clara was experiencing the chilling effect of Ethan's social warfare. Invitations stopped arriving. Calls from museum board members went unanswered. Her gallery was paralyzed by the internal audit, and the flow of her life was drying up. She felt the sudden, crushing weight of Manhattan's collective judgment. One afternoon, she visited a well-known psychiatrist whom she had both worked with and socialized with for years, seeking professional guidance. "I need help understanding why I did this, Dr. Lena," Clara confessed, her eyes raw and tired. "Mark, He's chaotic, yes, but Ethan's perfection choked me. I needed something loud, something messy to prove I was alive. Dr. Lena looked at her with pity, but also a professional wariness. Clara, I understand the need to escape, but you must realize the optics. Ethan is being perceived as the stable foundation that you, in your moment of crisis, tried to burn down. Society, especially our society, rewards the victim who suffers silently and professionally. The diagnosis was not psychological, but societal. Clara was being judged not for leaving her husband, but for doing it messily and publicly, even if she thought the text was private, and for jeopardizing her financial success in the process. She drove back to the gallery, feeling the cold, silent disapproval of the city pressing down on her. Ethan wasn't fighting her. He was letting the system, the very standards of success and propriety they had built their lives on, fight her for him. The social tribunal had convened, and the verdict, delivered not by a judge, but by 1,000 whispers and unanswered calls, was already against her. Ethan's silence was his megaphone, broadcasting his dignity and her disloyalty to the entire city. The penthouse, once a shared sanctuary, now functioned as Ethan's sterile fortress. It had been 10 days since the audit began, 10 days since Clara had set foot in the space. She returned on a Tuesday afternoon, not to seek reconciliation, but to retrieve the high-value documents stored in their secured wall safe, the original contracts, irreplaceable letters of intent from high-profile artists, and the encrypted drives containing her life's work. She arrived unannounced, using the private elevator code before Ethan could intervene. She wore a simple, expensive cashmere coat, a uniform of defensive power, but her eyes, usually sharp and assessing, were shadowed with exhaustion. The past week had been a nightmare of damage control, dealing with panicked staff, evasive lawyers, and Mark Harrington's increasingly erratic behavior. Mark, furious at the financial freeze, had flown to London, leaving her to clean up the mess. Ethan was waiting in the living room, standing precisely where he had received her text. He wore his architectural uniform, crisp white shirt, dark trousers. He looked not angry, but impossibly well-rested and utterly detached. "Clara," he greeted, his voice low, even, and devoid of inflection. It was the tone he used when addressing a difficult subcontractor. Clara had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind. She had planned to unleash the fury she had been stifling, to accuse him of petty cruelty, to demand he drop the audit, to force a volatile, cathartic scene that would give her emotional leverage. She took a step forward, intending to break the geometric perfection of the room. "You can't do this, Ethan. You are crippling the gallery. This isn't a divorce. It's a professional assassination." Ethan didn't move. He simply gestured toward the marble coffee table where a manila folder lay, thick and official. The initial separation papers, drawn up by Richard Vance, they address the division of our non-communal assets. The gallery, Thorne Contemporary, is a communal asset, hence the audit. I am legally bound to secure my investment and mitigate risk before dividing it. You understand that, Clara. It's simply logistics. He refused to engage the emotion. He refused to acknowledge the pain, the betrayal, or the affair. He talked about assets, clauses, and mitigation. By reducing their 15 years of marriage to a balance sheet, he denied her the fight she craved, leaving her rage suspended in the sterile air. "This is beneath you," Clara hissed, her voice trembling despite her resolve. "You're acting like a wounded child." Ethan finally met her gaze, and the chill in his eyes was absolute. "I am acting like a partner, ensuring the structural integrity of a failed venture, Clara. Nothing more. If you had wanted an emotional response, you should have sent a letter, not a declaration of war via a disposable phone from the Baccarat Hotel. The mention of the baccarat was a precise surgical strike. It confirmed that he knew everything, yet chose silence over noise. She walked quickly past him toward the wall safe in the study. While she was punching in the code, a three-digit sequence she still remembered from their first year of marriage, Ethan spoke again, his voice echoing slightly off the glass walls. "I've already changed the deed to the penthouse. It's now solely under my holding company, Thorne Developments. I'm renovating the guest wing next month. You'll need to send a list of any personal belongings you wish to retrieve, but please use a professional courier service." He addressed her as an impersonal entity. He had unilaterally decided the terms of her exile, stripping away her home with the same cold, architectural finality he used to demolish an unwanted structure. Clara retrieved the documents, stuffing them into her expensive leather tote. She turned back to face him one last time, needing to wound him, to extract one spark of human reaction. "Did you ever love me, Ethan? Or was I just another perfectly curated feature of your life? The art consultant wife model?" He looked at her, his expression finally softening, but only marginally, as if calculating the exact emotional cost of his answer. He didn't answer her question directly. Instead, he used the name he had stopped using socially years ago, her maiden name, Clara Vance, the name she bore before they built the Thorne Empire together. "I know everything, Clara Vance, and when you finally realize what that means, you'll understand that this discussion is over." He didn't raise his voice. He simply reiterated his total knowledge and control, then turned and walked toward the kitchen, leaving her alone in the vast, elegant silence of the room, the scent of expensive coffee and fresh revenge hanging in the air. Clara stood frozen, realizing that she hadn't just lost the man. She had lost the game before she even knew it had started. She turned and fled the penthouse, denied the emotional closure she had desperately sought. Ethan rarely permitted himself the indulgence of memory. His mind, trained for architecture, preferred the clean slate of the present and the structured projections of the future. Yet, tonight, sitting alone in his glass office, illuminated only by the faint glow of his desktop, the past flooded in, sharp and unwelcome. He pulled out a physical folder, sealed and tied with rough twine, tucked away in the back of his filing cabinet. Inside was a thick, yellowed sheaf of paper, the schematics for the lighthouse project, a self-sustaining vertical park concept he had spent 5 years developing for a competition in Dubai. It was his masterpiece, the work that promised to redefine his career, his legacy. He remembered the spring of 2012. Clara, then just launching her gallery, had been embroiled in a disastrous legal dispute. Her first major acquisition, a series of controversial, politically charged sculptures, had resulted in a swift, devastating lawsuit from the artist's estate over copyright infringement and unpaid royalties. The legal fees alone threatened to bankrupt her before she could even open her doors. Ethan was days away from submitting the final phase of the Lighthouse project bid, which would have required his firm's full capital reserve as a performance bond. Clara, terrified and tearful, the only time he had ever seen her truly relinquish control, begged him to use his resources to make the problem vanish. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the performance bond, killing the Lighthouse project on the eve of the submission deadline. He liquidated a large portion of his private holdings, funding a discreet, aggressive legal team that not only made Clara's problem disappear, but secured her ownership of the artwork, saving her career and her reputation. He had absorbed the loss and the disappointment silently, telling her only, "Your name is protected, Clara. Go build your empire." She had thanked him effusively then, promising to pay him back, but the debt was emotional, not financial, and it was quickly subsumed by the glittering momentum of her subsequent success. She had not forgotten the money, perhaps, but she had utterly erased the immense personal sacrifice, the 5 years of his life, his legacy, shelved for her sake. Now, That memory was a corrosive agent, mingling with the fresh poison of her betrayal. He had given up his magnum opus for her foundation, and she repaid him with 2 words and an affair with a known financial vulture. The phone rang, jolting him back to the present. It was Richard Vance, his lawyer. "Ethan, I have an update on the audit," Richard began, his tone taut. "Harrington Capital is pulling their initial capital injection. The financial freeze triggered a review of their own portfolio, and Mark Harrington is furious. He's accusing Clara of using the audit as a negotiating tactic to secure a better equity split." "Good," Ethan murmured, a cold satisfaction spreading through him. The structural fault lines are widening. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in a Los Angeles hotel suite, Clara was screaming at Mark. The news of the audit had not only jeopardized their deal, but had also created toxic internal politics at Harrington Capital, which was closing in on its fintech acquisition. "It's your ex-husband!" Clara yelled, slamming her hand on the glass table. "He's doing this to punish me! He built the contract! He knows the weaknesses!" Mark Harrington, dressed in wrinkled linen, ran a hand through his thinning hair. His bravado was gone, replaced by the cornered panic of a man whose money was threatened. "Stop using your marital drama as an excuse, Clara. Your husband, the architect, is being perfectly legal. This isn't revenge, it's a compliance review. But what I'm hearing is that your name is radioactive right now. And frankly, with all the rumors about those SEC settlements I had to pay out years ago, settlements your friends in New York are suddenly bringing up, this looks like a targeted attack on me through you." He took a step back, his eyes narrowing with sudden, furious suspicion. "Did you set this up? Were you trying to bleed me dry just to gain control of my investment? Did you deliberately let your husband think we were together just to scare me off the deal and then take the gallery back?" Clara was stunned by the accusation. The affair, born of mutual lust and a shared contempt for the stifling perfection of their respective lives, had just been reduced to a hostile takeover attempt. "Mark, that's insane. I love you," she pleaded, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "Love?" Mark scoffed, picking up his suitcase. "Love doesn't freeze liquidity, Clara. Only power does. You figure out what you want, but I'm going back to the Bay Area. Until this audit is resolved and your name is clean, Harrington Capital is out. And maybe," he added, his voice cold and final, "maybe you should reflect on why your ex-husband, the man you claim to hate, knew the perfect way to break us apart without even sending an email." The door slammed shut. Clara stood alone in the luxurious suite, realizing that the financial vice that Ethan had initiated was now successfully turning on itself, not only destroying her gallery, but shattering her new relationship with doubt and recrimination. The revenge was structural, effective, and deeply psychologically isolating. She was experiencing the consequence of forgetting the debts she owed, both to Ethan and to herself. The fallout from Mark Harrington's withdrawal was swift and brutal. The audit, still officially active and holding the gallery's non-essential funds captive, now looked less like a husband's grievance and more like the preemptive defense of a prudent businessman, just as Ethan had planned. Clara's most ambitious project, the Nexus exhibition, funded primarily by the conservative board of the Metropolitan Museum, was scheduled to open in 3 weeks. The timing was critical. The internal panic at Thorne Contemporary was palpable. Staff morale had plummeted, and the artists, sensing insolvency, began demanding guarantees of payment. Clara was spending 18 hours a day on the phone, trying to spin Mark's exit as a strategic realignment. But the industry was too small and too cynical to buy it. Ethan, meanwhile, moved in for the kill. He used the information he had gathered from the due diligence report on Mark Harrington, specifically the documentation related to the non-disclosure settlements, and combined it with the confirmed withdrawal of Harrington Capital. He didn't send a letter of accusation. He sent a highly structured, anonymized data packet. The recipient was Charles Dubois, the notoriously rigid and ethically zealous chairman of the Metropolitan Museum Board's Finance Committee, the key figure behind the Nexus funding. The packet, delivered discreetly to Dubois' private email, contained 3 items. 1. A legally sound document confirming Harrington Capital's abrupt withdrawal from Thorne Contemporary. 2. A redacted summary of the ongoing compliance audit at Thorne Contemporary, highlighting the material change in ethical standing clause, clause 4.2. 3. The verifiable public records of Mark Harrington's past legal entanglements and SEC settlements presented not as gossip, but as a severe, unmitigated reputational risk. The data packet contained no mention of the affair, no emotional plea, and no identification of the sender. It was pure business intelligence, designed to appeal directly to Dubois's 2 major fears: financial risk and public scandal. Charles Dubois, an old-guard New Yorker, saw not a heartbroken husband's retaliation, but a grave institutional threat. Allowing the museum's name and substantial grant to be associated with a gallery under ethical audit, whose main partner was a known litigant like Mark Harrington, was unacceptable. The optics alone could trigger a donor crisis. The board meeting was convened the next morning. It was short and decisive. Senator Hayes, already briefed by Olivia, voted immediately to protect the museum's assets. Dubois, supported by the Finance Committee, invoked a standard moral turpitude clause in the grant agreement. The decision was unanimous. The Metropolitan Museum was pulling the Nexus grant, effective immediately. The news broke on a small, influential art world blog at 4:00 p.m. It wasn't reported as the collapse of a marriage, but as the failure of a business venture due to unresolved capital and ongoing governance concerns. Clara was standing in the center of her gallery when the news hit her phone. She felt the structure around her, the soaring white walls, the carefully placed lighting, the very ground beneath her feet, shudder and disintegrate. The phone slipped from her grasp, the screen shattering on the polished concrete floor. Her manager rushed over, pale and distraught. "Clara, the Met just made a public statement. They're pulling out. We're insolvent. The artists, they're all demanding their pieces back." Clara didn't respond. She looked at the blank, empty pedestals where the Nexus collection was supposed to stand, the culmination of her entire career. Ethan hadn't just broken her heart. He had meticulously dismantled her identity, brick by excruciating brick. That evening, Ethan was at a rooftop bar in Midtown, overlooking the city he had built and controlled. He was alone, sipping a $20 glass of single malt. He watched a news crawler on a silent screen behind the bar flash a brief headline: "Thorne Contemporary Exhibition Halted Due to Funding Dispute." He felt the victory resonate in the heavy silence he carried, but it was a cold, tasteless thing. He had won the battle for control, extinguishing the life Clara had chosen without him. But as he looked out at the city lights, identical to the night she sent her text, he realized that in his quest to destroy her empire, he had merely created a vast, empty space in his own life, a profound, architectural void where love and a capacity for joy once stood. The cold satisfaction was already turning to ash. The penthouse was immaculate. The renovation of the former guest wing, Clara's designated study, was complete, transformed into a minimalist library dedicated solely to architectural theory. The walls were now a cool, unforgiving white, and the entire space smelled faintly of fresh paint and new leather bindings, a scent that Ethan found comforting in its clean finality. It had been 2 weeks since the public implosion of Thorne Contemporary. The gallery had filed for voluntary liquidation, and the news cycle had moved on, classifying Clara's downfall as another cautionary tale of ambition colliding with poor governance. Mark Harrington had successfully closed his fintech acquisition, his reputation largely intact. Having distanced himself quickly from the volatile art world, Ethan had won. He was officially and irrevocably divorced. The financial settlement heavily skewed in his favor, securing all major assets he cared about. Clara, stripped of her professional identity and her social currency, had disappeared from New York, rumored to be living quietly on the West Coast, reinventing herself far from the glare of the Manhattan spotlight. He walked through the vast, silent apartment. The charcoal sofa was still there, but the Rothko-esque painting was gone, replaced by a massive, bare panel of concrete, a deliberate void. Ethan found himself wandering through the halls, admiring the perfect angles, the structural integrity of his surroundings, yet feeling an intense, suffocating emptiness. His victory was total, yet entirely hollow. He had eliminated the chaos, but he had also eliminated the life. He realized his revenge hadn't been about justice or retrieving his dignity. It had been an elaborate, high-stakes project to reassert control. He had engineered a perfect collapse, but the silence that followed was not the quiet satisfaction of peace, but the echoing sound of a demolition site after the dust settles. On his desk, next to his meticulously organized blueprint files, lay an envelope. It was thick, creamy stock, the kind of paper used for formal invitations or declarations. It was addressed to him, simply, Ethan Thorne, TriBeCa. It was a physical letter, delivered by post, a relic from another era, breaking the pattern of their clinical digital exchanges. He sliced the seal with a sterling silver letter opener, his hands, usually so steady, feeling a slight tremor. The letter was not signed by Clara Thorne, but by Clara Vance, her maiden name, the name he had used during their final, chilling conversation. The handwriting was elegant, precise, a final curation of her thoughts. Ethan, I received the final papers. The liquidation is almost complete. You were thorough. You left me with nothing but the clothes on my back and the pieces of paper with my name on them. You executed your plan with the kind of ruthless, silent perfection that should be taught at business schools. I write this not to apologize or to ask for forgiveness. I know those words mean nothing to the man you have become. I write this because I have finally understood the meaning of your silence and the cost of your revenge. When I sent that text, I'm staying. I committed a single, reckless crime against our marriage. It was a failure of the heart, driven by lust, and a profound, desperate need to feel real again, outside the museum piece we had created. But your crime, Ethan, was structural. You used your knowledge, your power, and your history, that forgotten debt of the Lighthouse Project, not to wound me emotionally, but to destroy my capacity to function in the world. You took away my identity, my future, and my voice, and you did it not with anger, but with silence and precision. The most devastating thing about your vengeance is this. I came to believe, during those terrible days of the audit, that the man I married was cold, but fundamentally good. That he was a man capable of great sacrifice, as he showed me years ago. I thought that man was the true victim. But as I watched the flawless collapse you engineered, I realized the true victim wasn't the broken husband, or the betrayed wife, or the lost business. It was the good man inside you, the one who sacrificed his masterpiece for love. You destroyed him. You killed the capacity for mercy, for messy, human forgiveness, just to ensure your victory was absolute. You won the game, Ethan, but you are sitting alone in your empty citadel, presiding over a vacuum. You wanted me to be ruined, and I am. But you, my dear architect, You are merely perfected, and perfection is the loneliest state of all. Clara Vance. Ethan lowered the letter. The paper was cool and dry, yet the words burned. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried since he was a child. But a profound geological shift occurred within him. He looked at the vast, silent, perfect room, at the bare concrete panel where the painting had hung, and understood. He had craved the silence, the control, the perfect execution of his revenge. But in achieving it, he had constructed his own prison, a monument to his unforgiving intellect, isolated from the messy, flawed, vibrant world where true life and, crucially, true pain and subsequent healing existed. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city lights. They no longer shimmered with possibility. They were cold, distant pinpricks in the darkness. He had wanted to teach Clara a lesson about consequences, but she had delivered the final, most devastating lesson to him. The cost of silence is the loss of your soul. He was the master architect of chaos, now trapped in the flawless, silent structure of his own making. The revenge was complete, and the resulting emptiness was infinite.